everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Katie, and if you're not new here, thank you so much for subscribing, and thank you to all of my friends and family and neighbors and people who are watching and supporting me. You guys are so sweet. Today, can we please talk about podcasts? I love podcasts, and I've been an avid podcast listener since the earliest I could remember was 2004, 2005. And I actually just looked to see when podcasts started. That's a mouthful. And it turns out like late 2004 is when they kind of took off. I just love it because there's so many different genres. There's something for everybody. I'm also in a podcast club with 3 of my girlfriends, Jamie, Liz, and Laura. And we all love, obviously, podcasts. And we get together once a month. And we haven't really figured out the rules of the club yet, but we kind of just get together and are sort of like, have you heard of this one? Have you heard of this one? And we're like in our phones taking notes and subscribing on our phones. And it's really just a good excuse, much like a book club, to get together and travel around to all the different Mexican restaurants in our area and have margaritas and tacos. So what's not to love about that? So I have my notes, I've got a list, and I've kind of separated everything that I listen to into 3 separate categories. And those categories are a loyal subscriber, and that means that I subscribe to the podcast and I probably listen to almost every episode. The second one is selectively subscribe, and that means that I subscribe to the channel, but I might not listen to every single episode, but I have, I just kind of pick and choose what I listen to. And then the third one is series. So that's something like a Serial or an S-Town that kind of begins and ends at some point, and it's really easy to like binge listen to it or whatnot. So those are the 3 categories that I'm gonna go over. So the first one is loyal subscriber. Now, my very favorite podcast that whenever it shows up in my phone, I listen to it immediately, is called Bitch Sesh, a real podcast breakdown. And they go over everything related to Bravo, mainly the Housewives. But I love listening to it. I always love whenever I'm into like a certain TV show or a series, I love listening to the breakdown of things after on a podcast. And particularly the Housewives, a lot of my friends don't share the love for the Housewives like I do. And so it's my way to sort of like just hear someone else's take on it, or just, I actually think I like listening to them talk about it more than I even like watching the episode. It's ran by 2 ladies, and one of them is Casey Rose Wilson, who used to be an SNL cast member. She was on Happy Endings, which was a show that I loved, and she's just hilarious. And then the other woman, Danielle Snyder, is a writer on network shows, and the 2 of them just have the funniest rapport. And oh my God, I'm just thinking to a show, I think it was a week or 2 ago that they did about, they were talking about a pubic hair situation, and it was so funny. So I think I have to pick and choose when I listen to this podcast, because I once almost fell off the elliptical at the gym laughing so hard. And I was like, okay, I can't listen to this in public anymore. But I think even if you don't listen to or you don't watch The Housewives, I think you would still probably like it, because it's about an hour long, and half of the time they talk about things that are situations that are going on in their life, which is always hysterical, i.e. the pubic hair story. And I just love the relationship they have, and it's just so funny. Now, my second favorite podcast is called My Favorite Murder, and this one it's getting a cult following behind it. More and more people are learning about it. Basically, they kind of talk about a murder every week. They both come to the table with like a different murder that they discuss, and it's just, if you like true crime, different crazy stories. They talk about people's hometown murders, like what was the murder growing up in your hometown that like got you into true crime. But if you appreciate highly researched content, reliable information, staying on task, you might not like this podcast. But if you like discussing true crime amongst friends, going off on a tangent, cursing every now and again, and fun taglines like fuck politeness and stay sexy, don't get murdered, you might really, really like this one. So that, if you haven't checked that one out, I definitely would. Okay, so on to my next category, which is selectively subscribe. Now, a lot of people seem to not know that Alec Baldwin has a podcast, and he's had it for quite a long time, since like 2011, and he used to do it more frequently, but now it's kind of just, I guess he's busy playing Trump, so now it's just kind of whenever he does it. But it's called Here's the Thing. He interviews a lot of different celebrities. Obviously, he's very well connected, and so he interviews a lot of great people. And it has definitely like an NPR vibe to it, and it's kind of like he's got like saxophone music in the beginning, and I just get I just envision him in like a newsroom with his like legs up on the desk, maybe smoking a cigar and like interviewing someone with like a hat. I kind of wanted to tell you some of the ones that I've listened to that I've really liked, and I'm going to throw in the dates too, because he's been doing this for a long time and they're not by episode number. So if you scroll through, it's easier to find it by the date. But most recently, he interviewed Grace Coddington, who is was the creative director for Vogue. And that was a really lovely conversation. And so I really appreciated that. That was March 6th. He interviewed Sarah Jessica Parker in February of 2015, and that was a really good episode. And then he interviewed Lena Dunham 2 times in January of 2014 and January of 2015. And I really like listening to Lena Dunham. I never watched Girls, but I just really liked her and kind of just what she stands for in terms of like women and female empowerment and all that. So his interview with her was fantastic. And he's just a really good interviewer. Like, could he be more talented? So that's a really great one. And then another really great interviewer is Katie Couric, and she has a podcast that started a couple of months ago. She recently interviewed Ina Garten, who's the Barefoot Contessa, and I am such a huge Ina fan. I adore her. She talked about feminism, taking risks. Jeffrey popped in at the last minute for a little cameo. She talked about, how she used to write nuclear energy bills for the White House, and I saw her in a different light than I had before, and I was like, you could also be a life coach or motivational speaker. Like, she was fantastic. And then Katie Couric recently interviewed Sheryl Sandberg, but she most recently wrote the book Option B, all about kind of going through grief and having resilience and coming back from difficult times. And it's about the loss of her husband, that he had basically a heart attack, I think, on vacation. And the interview with them particularly was fantastic because Katie Couric also lost her husband. And it was just a really, if you've ever been through grief or you will ever support someone going through grief, because she talks a lot about how eye-opening the experience was of people supporting you when they've gone through it as well. It spoke to me in so many different ways. I immediately went out and bought the book. But even if you don't buy the book, I would listen to this episode. It was so beautiful, and the rapport between the two of them, because they have such a shared experience. It was a really great interview, and I had tears in my eyes. So, okay, on to the next one. Now, I love a good smut podcast, and there's one called Juicy Scoop, which is hosted by Heather McDonald, who used to, she's a comedian and stand-up comic, and she used to be on Chelsea Handler. But it's just great. She talks a lot about the Housewives, and she interviews a lot of celebrities. She has a lot of great guest hosts on, and she kind of, they're not typical interviews. She definitely asks, what you wish you could ask if they were there, and which is, not the typical, perfect questions, but it's just why did you do this? Or, it's just really, gossipy goodness, and she's not afraid to go there. And I really like a bit of Juicy Scoop every now and then. Another newer one that I've been listening to lately is called Young House Love Has a Podcast. And if that sounds familiar to you, it's because it is the people from the very famous blog Young House Love. And now I know that some people kind of love to hate them, and I don't know why that is, but anyways, I really like them in a podcast form. And I know that it might seem kind of strange because they have a home decorating and home decor blog, and that's very visual. But they talk a lot about different projects that they're taking on, different things that they've learned. They have little fun game segments where, oh my God, I can't think of what the guy's name is. The woman is Cheryl, I think. Is it? Anyways, but the guy will list off a bunch of paint color names, and he'll put a plant in there, and she'll have to figure out what the fake one is, and it's never the one you think it is. But it's just fun games like that. And they just bought a house recently, a vacation property type thing, and so they're talking about that. They also interview a lot of great people that we've all heard of. So another really good podcast is called How I Built This. And I think my friend Laura in my podcast club told me about this one. They interview a lot of entrepreneurs and they talk about how different people have come to where they are. And with success comes a lot of failures and mistakes and course correction. They interviewed the people from Starbucks, people from Warby Parker, Crate and Barrel, Allie Webb, who's the owner of Dry Bar, Kendra Scott, who has a jewelry company, and just a lot of different people. So big businesses, small entrepreneurs, and just a lot of different things there. And so if you like that kind of stuff, or if you like people who are like go-getters who, start their own business from the ground up, definitely a lot of motivational stuff there. And just it's always interesting to hear people's story of how they rise to success and inspirational stuff. So I always love that. And then the next one is, if you like Star Wars, Game of Thrones, anything geeky, you will like this one. It's called Nerdflix and Chill. And my sister Carrie happens to do this podcast with her friend Nick. And they also broke down every episode of Stranger Things. My sister has a really cool background. She used to be a puppeteer for Disney for years. She's done a lot of behind the scenes stuff. And so she sees things with a totally different creative eye than I would ever watch things with. And so a lot of times her breakdown of movies is from like more of a creative standpoint. And so she'll talk about, like set direction, makeup, like, oh my God, can you imagine how many times they had to paint that guy blue? And then they always seem to find like the really deep meaning in things. And they're just things that things that fly over my head. So I would definitely check that one out if that is your genre. And then my final category is series. So things like Serial, which of course I listen to, Missing Richard Simmons. I think by now probably most people have listened to that. And I know that a lot of people kind of, he was never really found, and so it wasn't a really great ending, but I still enjoyed the ride. Like, I enjoyed every episode, even though, I guess it was controversial of this guy, like, really kind of trying to find him, and the whole podcast in general was perhaps controversial, but I enjoyed it. I loved learning more about Richard Simmons. I loved learning about that he had, like, I didn't know that he had, like, until he went missing, that he had a jazzercise studio in LA called Simmons. Like, I wish I would have known. I would have gone there and taken it. And there was like a code of conduct for like who stood in the front line, or who stood in the front, and where everyone was in this jazzercise class. And I just loved learning about it. Even though it didn't end well, I really loved it. And I would, if you haven't listened to it, I would absolutely listen to it. And then another one that I want to mention is a series that was a short series. I think it was just 5 or 6 episodes. I don't remember. But it was called Making Oprah. And if you love Oprah, like I love Oprah, you will love this podcast, and you absolutely have to listen to it. It's a woman who just kind of talks about how Oprah became Oprah. And it's really interesting to sort of go back and remember that Oprah started back when, Sally Jessy Raphael, Phil Donahue, Maury Povich, like her content was pretty scrappy in the beginning, as was everybody's at the time. But it really talks about the revolution of the show and how she revolutionized like literally how people live. And that she wasn't always the live your best life Oprah, but that it was really like her book club that turned around and she started taking like a totally different direction. But it's great because they interview a lot of staffers, a lot of people who were kind of behind the whole like you get a car, that episode, and just a lot of the little things behind the scenes. And then in the end was really great because she actually gets to interview Oprah, and it was a really great like feel good couple of episodes. So if you love Oprah and you miss Oprah in the daytime like I do, you will love looking back and remembering the love of Oprah. Anyways, so those were my favorite podcasts. I definitely think that I will revisit this topic at some point as I get more. I actually have more that I wanted to talk about, but I don't want this to be too long. So Lord knows I can be long-winded. So thank you so much for watching. Please let me know if there's a podcast that you love that I should check out. I would love to do that. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Bye, guys.